Imagine this. You wake up one morning in a room that feels both familiar and suffocating. The sunlight streams through the blinds, painting lines across the walls. But instead of comfort, it only exposes shadows you didn't know were there. You look in the mirror, expecting the reflection of someone kind, someone compassionate, someone who has always tried to do the right thing. But the face staring back at you feels strange, like it belongs to someone you've only glimpsed in nightmares, someone capable of cruelty, indifference, or calculated malice. How did you get here? How did the good person you believed yourself to be begin to harbor a monster within? The paradox is undeniable. The very qualities that make you good, the empathy, the patience, the relentless desire to please, to help, to avoid conflict, can be the instruments of your own moral erosion. The kindness you wield like a shield against the world may paradoxically be what sharpens the claws of the shadow lurking beneath your conscience. You have lived by rules, upheld ethics, and followed principles, yet somehow, in the quiet corners of your mind, you feel the pull of something darker. The questions begin to multiply. Can goodness become a trap? Can the person who refuses to hurt others end up destroying themselves? Or worse, destroying others in ways they never imagined? Think of history's most unsettling truths. Those who commit monstrous acts are rarely monsters from birth. They are often ordinary people, once devoted to virtue, thrust into circumstances where their virtues bend, crack, or turn inward. Imagine a devoted teacher who, in the name of discipline, breaks the spirits of those she wishes to guide. Picture a compassionate doctor whose obsession with saving lives blinds him to the quiet suffering his methods cause. Even you, sitting in the silence of your room, wondering how much of yourself is still untouched, are susceptible. The tension is unbearable because you recognize that the line between saint and sinner is thinner than you ever dared imagine. Could it be that every good person carries within them the potential for something monstrous, dormant yet insistent, waiting for the right or wrong moment to emerge? And then there's the world outside your door, equally deceptive. Society glorifies virtue, praises empathy, and worships selflessness, but it is built on compromises, unspoken hierarchies, and invisible pressures. It encourages you to obey, to conform, and to internalize guilt and shame. What begins as harmless compliance slowly transforms into moral corrosion. How often do you justify a small compromise, telling yourself it is for the greater good, only to find that compromise accumulating, until suddenly your actions, once unthinkable, seem inevitable? The mind is a labyrinth, and the path from innocence to culpability is rarely marked by a single dramatic fall. It is a quiet descent, a series of unnoticed steps, until the monster wakes within the person you thought you were. You may wonder, as you trace these lines of thought, whether this is fear-mongering or an uncomfortable truth. Consider the nature of desire, ambition, and frustration. Even the noblest intentions are vulnerable to corruption. Empathy can be twisted into manipulation, patience into passive complicity, love into obsession or control. Every virtue is a double-edged sword. Every moral high ground can conceal a hidden precipice. How do you measure the point at which your goodness becomes dangerous, not just to yourself, but to those around you? And more terrifyingly, how do you know when you've already crossed it? The paradox gnaws at you. You are a good person. You care. You strive to be right. And yet lurking beneath the surface, there is the potential for monstrous thought, action, and intent. What is the nature of this transformation? Is it inevitable? Is it something external that bends you, or an intrinsic shadow within that waits for its moment? Are monsters born, or are they created, piece by piece, from the fragments of good intentions misapplied, misunderstood, or exploited? This is the question that will haunt you if you choose to follow this path. How does someone with a conscience, with empathy, with principles, transform into someone capable of acts they once abhorred? It is a question that is not merely philosophical or psychological, it is existential. It stares into the darkest corners of identity and whispers that the line between yourself and the monster is thinner and closer than you would ever dare admit. And as you sit with this realization, feeling a chill crawl across your spine, you begin to understand that this is not a story about villains or heroes. It is about you. It is about the fragile architecture of morality, the unseen forces that shape your mind, and the choices you make or fail to make every single day. What follows is not easy to confront. You are about to explore the hidden mechanics of moral decay, the shadows lurking in ordinary hearts, and the quiet transformations that turn virtue into vice. It is a journey into discomfort, into tension, invention, and ultimately into revelation. But first, you must step further into the labyrinth of the human psyche, where the roots of monstrous potential twist beneath the surface of everyday goodness.
Beneath the calm surface of a good person lies a network of subtle forces, psychological currents, and philosophical contradictions that quietly shape thoughts, desires, and actions. These forces are rarely acknowledged because they do not announce themselves with drama. Instead, they creep in silently, in whispers of doubt, fleeting justifications, or the weight of social expectation. To understand how good people turn into monsters, you must first confront these hidden mechanics. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the repository of everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, every impulse we deny, every resentment we suppress, every uncomfortable truth we refuse to face accumulates in the dark corners of our psyche. At first, it seems harmless, a mild irritation or a fleeting thought, but the shadow is cunning. It waits, unobserved, until circumstances, or stress, fear, or desire provide an opening. When that moment comes, it does not knock politely. It storms the gates. And here lies the paradox. The more a person identifies as good, the more they repress, the larger the shadow grows, until eventually it becomes impossible to ignore. Nietzsche recognized a similar tension in the concept of morality itself. In On the Genealogy of Morals, he explored how conventional morality often constrains natural instincts, promoting a system in which the suppression of self-interest is considered virtuous. Yet these instincts do not vanish, they mutate. A man praised for selflessness may find his resentment, envy, or desire festering beneath a veneer of compliance. In time, that very morality, the commitment to be good, can warp into cruelty, domination, or moral superiority, all cloaked in the guise of righteousness. What was intended as virtue becomes, paradoxically, a conduit for vice. Society compounds this psychological vulnerability. Modern life teaches obedience, conformity, and avoidance of conflict. From childhood, we are rewarded for politeness, empathy, and sacrifice, and punished for rebellion or self-assertion. Over time, the compulsion to please others, to meet external expectations, begins to erode the boundaries between your authentic self and the persona you present. Jean-Paul Sartre would call this bad faith, the surrender of freedom to roles, labels, and expectations, resulting in actions that betray the true self. When the pressure of conformity becomes unbearable, the psyche may rebel in unexpected ways. The good person's rebellion is rarely heroic. It often emerges as subtle acts of cruelty, passive aggression, or a manipulative behavior hidden beneath a mask of propriety. Consider also the role of suffering and trauma. Viktor Frankl observed that meaning is often forged in the crucible of pain, yet unprocessed suffering, particularly when accompanied by societal pressure to remain good or composed, can twist the mind's moral compass. The person who refuses to acknowledge anger, grief, or resentment may channel those emotions outward in ways that feel justified, righteous, or even necessary. Addiction to control, obsession with fairness, or the quiet vindictiveness that arises from prolonged frustration are all byproducts of unintegrated suffering. The line between moral indignation and monstrous behavior is, in practice, razor thin. Arthur Schopenhauer would argue that this is the inevitable tragedy of the human condition. The will to live, the desire to assert yourself, and the frustration of unfulfilled needs create an internal tension that society demands you disguise. The more you deny these instincts, the more likely they will erupt destructively. Even kindness can become dangerous. Too much compassion, when coupled with repression, can lead to codependency, exploitation, or the silent nurturing of resentment that eventually bursts forth in aggression or manipulation. Aldous Huxley foresaw the societal pressures that exacerbate this transformation in his dystopian visions. When pleasure is commodified, distractions are omnipresent, and conformity is rewarded, good intentions are diverted into harmful patterns. The person who once thought to nurture truth, justice, or empathy may find themselves bending, compromising, or rationalizing actions that conflict with their original ideals. The monster is rarely conscious at first. It grows quietly, nurtured by the very values the person thought protected them. Neurological research supports these insights. Humans are wired for social approval, but prolonged stress, fear, or moral conflict can activate the amygdala and limbic system, heightening aggression and diminishing impulse control. Cognitive dissonance, when actions conflict with beliefs, produces anxiety and discomfort. The mind resolves this tension not always by returning to virtue, but often by rewriting morality in ways that justify harmful behaviors. In essence, the brain itself conspires to transform goodness into something darker, particularly when virtues are unexamined or rigidly imposed. The hidden problem, then, is not simply a question of bad character or moral failure. It is an intricate interplay of shadow, societal pressures, unprocessed trauma, and cognitive architecture that quietly coalesces into something dangerous. The good person does not awaken one day as a monster. They are gradually shaped by forces both internal and external, by compromises and denials, until the transformation is almost imperceptible. And because it begins in the guise of virtue, it is often invisible to the very person undergoing it.
The transformation from a good person into a monster rarely announces itself with a single dramatic act. Instead, it seeps quietly into the structures of life, manifesting in ways both subtle and profound. At first, it appears as small compromises, an overlooked lie, a justified manipulation, an anger withheld only to explode later. These are the whispers of the shadow making its presence felt. But over time, these whispers coalesce into patterns, shaping not only your psyche, but the world you inhabit. Imagine a society in which countless good people, each suppressing their own shadow in the pursuit of virtue, interact daily. The collective weight of unacknowledged resentment, disguised aggression, and rationalized selfishness begins to ripple outward. A compassionate leader, unable to confront the darker impulses festering inside, may enforce policies that harm the very people they intend to protect. A devoted parent, quietly nurturing frustration beneath the veneer of love, shapes the minds of their children in ways that carry forward cycles of fear and compliance. The unseen consequences are systemic. The monster does not only inhabit the individual, it infiltrates institutions, cultures, and societies. Cognitive biases amplify this quiet corruption. Confirmation bias, for instance, reinforces justifications for harmful actions. A person convinces themselves that cruelty is necessary, or that inaction is equivalent to moral righteousness. The fundamental attribution error disguises internal failure as external necessity. Others are blamed, the world is deemed unfair, and yet the monster's hand moves unchecked, often in the name of justice, empathy, or morality. Every act of suppression, every rationalization nudges the individual closer to behaviors they once swore they would never commit. Neurological studies reveal the mechanics behind this shift. Chronic stress, moral conflict, and suppressed emotion activate the amygdala, heighten impulsivity, and weaken prefrontal control, the region responsible for planning, empathy, and judgment. When the brain is constantly forced to reconcile virtue with unacknowledged shadow impulses, it begins to normalize morally ambiguous behavior. What once felt unthinkable gradually becomes tolerable, even necessary. A kind person may find themselves engaging in subtle manipulation, withholding truth, or quietly punishing those who challenge their worldview. The transformation is rarely explosive. It is insidious, almost invisible. Cultural conditioning reinforces these shifts. Modern society, particularly in technologically mediated environments, rewards appearances over authenticity. Good intentions are evaluated externally rather than internally. Likes, approvals, and social validation become proxies for morality. The good person learns to perform virtue rather than inhabit it. In this theater of ethics, monsters hide in plain sight. A leader who seems empathetic, a friend who seems loyal, a neighbor who seems conscientious, all may carry shadows that subtly distort their behavior. The individual's inner corruption merges with cultural pressures, creating a feedback loop that masks moral decay while accelerating it. Historical examples illustrate the terrifying consequences of this quiet shift. Consider regimes built not by inherently evil individuals, but by ordinary citizens convinced they were acting morally, through obedience, nationalism, or ideological fervor. Thinkers like Hannah Arendt observed this phenomenon as the banality of evil. Monsters are often bureaucrats, neighbors, or colleagues who commit atrocities not out of inherent malevolence, but through unexamined conformity, suppressed conscience, and moral rationalization. Each small act of acquiescence, each compromise of principle, accumulates, creating a reality in which monstrous behavior becomes normal. On a personal level, the consequences are equally profound. Relationships begin to degrade without anyone consciously noticing why. Trust erodes, subtle manipulations proliferate, and resentment festers
stirs in silent corners. The good person may look outward and blame circumstance or others, never realizing that the monster within is the true architect of this decay. Emotional intimacy becomes a battleground, moral integrity becomes performative, and self-perception fractures. You may wake one day realizing that the person who smiles at you in the mirror is partly unrecognizable, a stranger shaped by hidden currents of suppressed shadow, stress, and rationalization. Even more chilling is the ripple effect. The unseen consequences of one individual's moral corruption extend beyond personal life, subtly influencing communities, workplaces, and cultural norms. A teacher's silent cruelty seeps into classrooms, a leader's moral compromises infect policy, a parent's quiet resentment imprint patterns of insecurity on children. The cycle multiplies. Each suppressed shadow and each rationalized transgression lays the groundwork for the next. Like an invisible contagion, the monster spreads, not through conscious intent, but through the gradual normalization of compromise, justification, and internalized darkness. The horror lies in its invisibility. You rarely notice the first step, the first lie, the first act of quiet vindictiveness, the first moment you justify cruelty in the name of goodness. Yet these moments are seeds. They germinate in the fertile soil of repression, social pressure, and cognitive bias, eventually blossoming into behavior you never thought possible. The monster is patient. It waits. It grows. And when it finally emerges, it is not dramatic. It is ordinary, insidious, and undeniable. And now, having seen the weight of these unseen consequences, the urgency becomes clear. To understand how to reclaim your morality, your identity, and your freedom, you must first confront the mechanisms that allowed the monster to take root. You must discover the path of rebellion, not against others, but against the internal and external forces that distort goodness, that twist virtue into vice, and that quietly prepare the mind for transformation. The breakthrough lies ahead, but to reach it, you must step into a radical rethinking of self and society, challenging everything you thought you knew about morality, power, and human nature.
Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, the monster that has been silently shaping your thoughts, actions, and relationships looming behind you. Its presence is unmistakable now. You feel the weight of all the compromises, the suppressed resentments, the rationalized cruelty pressing on your chest. And yet, instead of panic, there is clarity. The monster can be confronted, contained, and ultimately transformed. But the path forward is neither simple nor conventional. It demands a rebellion, not against others, but against the very currents that have shaped your psyche, the societal pressures that reinforced them, and the inner shadows you have long denied. The first step in this rebellion is radical honesty. You must look into the mirror of your mind and acknowledge everything you have repressed, rationalized, or ignored. Carl Jung emphasized that the shadow cannot be destroyed by denial. It can only be integrated through conscious recognition. This requires a courage of a kind that few cultivate, the willingness to confront the parts of yourself that you have labeled unacceptable, frightening, or shameful. Anger, envy, desire, pride, these are not sins to expel, but energies to understand, master, and direct consciously. The moment you name the shadow, it begins to lose its clandestine power. You stop being a passive vessel for forces you do not control. The next layer of rebellion is liberation from moral rigidity. Nietzsche warned that strict adherence to societal morality often stifles individuality and fosters hidden resentment. To break free, you must redefine your values from the inside out. This does not mean discarding ethics, but discerning which values are authentically yours and which were imposed to keep you compliant. When you act in alignment with conscious choice rather than blind obligation, you reclaim power. The monster thrives in the tension between internal desires and external pressures. Reducing that tension diminishes its grip. Historical examples reveal how ordinary individuals reclaim agency in the face of moral corruption. Consider resistance fighters in oppressive regimes, whistleblowers exposing systemic injustice, or artists who defied censorship to reveal hidden truths. These are not exceptional people born immune to shadow. They are individuals who faced their inner darkness, understood it, and chose action rooted
rooted in awareness. Their rebellion is not flashy heroism. It is painstaking, often lonely, and internally exacting. Yet it is transformative because it interrupts the silent, insidious path from goodness to monstrosity. Self-awareness alone is insufficient without deliberate practice. The rebellion requires cultivating what modern psychology calls metacognition, the ability to observe your own thought processes objectively. You learn to notice when a virtue is bending toward a vice, when compassion becomes manipulation, or when patience mutates into passive compliance. You develop the capacity to pause before reaction, interrogate motive, and choose consciously. In doing so, you reclaim the space between impulse and action, the space where morality is not inherited from society, but consciously enacted. Another essential component of this rebellion is boundary setting. The good person often falters because they cannot say no, cannot resist external pressures, and cannot protect themselves from the constant intrusion of demands. Viktor Frankl emphasized that meaning arises from responsibility, choice, and the courage to endure suffering consciously. To reclaim yourself, you must define the limits of what you allow, not as acts of selfishness, but as acts of integrity. Boundaries are the armor of consciousness. They protect against exploitation, passive complicity, and the slow creep of the monster into your life. The rebellion is also philosophical. It demands an embrace of paradox. You must accept that you are both good and capable of monstrous thought, that virtues can conceal vices, and that morality is not static but dynamic. Sartre's notion of freedom illuminates this tension. You are condemned to freedom, accountable for every choice, every act, every thought. The weight of this realization can crush the unprepared, but it can also liberate the vigilant. Freedom is the battlefield on which the rebellion against your shadow is waged. Integration of shadow, liberation from imposed morality, self-awareness, boundaries, and acceptance of paradox are the tools. Yet rebellion also requires action. Reflection without execution is inertia. The person who has glimpsed the monster must actively disrupt the patterns that feed it, speaking truth where silence ruled, acting in alignment with conscious values, correcting injustices where you have power, and confronting discomfort instead of escaping it. Each deliberate choice is a brick in the fortress that contains your shadow, a strike against the slow erosion of your moral core. The beauty of this rebellion is paradoxical. In confronting the monster, you become whole. By acknowledging your capacity for darkness, you reclaim the power to act with genuine goodness, not performative virtue. By refusing to obey pressures that distort morality, you reclaim agency. By integrating shadow impulses, you harness energy that previously fueled covert aggression, guilt, or resentment. The monster no longer operates clandestinely because you are no longer a passive vessel. You transform potential corruption into conscious action. And here lies the secret. The rebellion is not a one-time event, but a perpetual process. Every day presents choices that test your integration, your awareness, and your commitment to conscious morality. Moments of stress, frustration, or desire will always offer the opportunity for the shadow to reassert itself. But with the tools of radical honesty, authentic values, metacognition, boundaries, and acceptance of paradox, the monster loses its dominion. You are no longer defined by silent, unseen forces, but by the deliberate architecture of your conscious actions. The stage is set for the final revelation, the ultimate truth of how good people transform into monsters, and more importantly, how they reclaim themselves. Having navigated the shadow, confronted societal pressures, and taken steps to integrate darkness into conscious life, you are now poised to glimpse a realization that will forever alter your understanding of morality, identity, and human nature. The rebellion prepares you, but the awakening awaits.
Now imagine standing not on a cliff, but at the center of a vast mirror, one that reflects every choice you have ever made, every thought you have suppressed, every impulse you have denied.
The reflection is no longer a simple image of good or bad. It is a mosaic of contradictions, a tapestry of light and shadow, interwoven so tightly that you cannot separate one from the other. And in this moment, the ultimate truth reveals itself. The monster is not outside you. It is you. It has always been you. But so too has your capacity for conscious goodness, your ability to shape morality from awareness rather than compulsion. This realization is not comforting, it is electrifying. For centuries, philosophers and psychologists have grappled with the duality of human nature. Jung described the shadow not to instill fear, but to illuminate the terrain of consciousness. Nietzsche warned that the suppression of instinct in favor of imposed virtue carries the seeds of moral corruption. Sartre would argue that freedom comes with the burden of radical responsibility. When you piece these threads together, a picture emerges. The good person and the monster are not two separate entities. They are two dimensions of the same being, constantly in flux, constantly in tension, and constantly offering choice. The consequences of ignoring this truth are profound. Until now, the monster has thrived in secrecy, shaping your life and the lives of others without acknowledgement. But once you see the duality clearly, once you recognize that darkness and light coexist within the same vessel, something shifts. You no longer blame circumstance, society, or even innate character for acts of compromise or moral distortion. You recognize the profound agency inherent in every moment. Every thought, every decision becomes an opportunity for conscious action. The terror of moral vulnerability transforms into empowerment. Consider what this means for everyday life. When someone provokes you, you no longer automatically react in ways conditioned by repression, fear, or unexamined anger. You pause, observe, and act from deliberate choice. When you encounter systemic injustice, you no longer feel paralyzed by the sense that ordinary people are powerless. You understand that monsters do not act alone. They're empowered by compliance, denial, and ignorance. By embracing your own duality, you can act consciously to break cycles of corruption, manipulation, and cruelty. The revelation extends beyond personal morality into a profound philosophical insight. Good and evil are not absolutes, but expressions of awareness and choice. They are consequences of integration versus repression, consciousness versus denial. A saint and a tyrant are not necessarily born with different essences. They are shaped by the degree to which they confront and integrate their shadow, the extent to which they exercise conscious choice under pressure. The paradigm shift is staggering. Morality is not a static code to follow, but a dynamic, lived process. It is an art form, sculpted from understanding, vigilance, and courage. The final, most haunting lesson is that this truth is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it grants you the tools to reclaim yourself, to act with integrity, and to prevent the silent erosion of your morality. Terrifying because it strips away comforting illusions. There is no external savior, no moral system beyond your own vigilance that guarantees you will remain uncorrupted. The monster cannot be banished by rules, rituals, or platitudes. It can only be acknowledged, integrated, and transformed through conscious choice. History, literature, and psychology provide countless examples of individuals who glimpsed this truth and transformed their lives. Dostoevsky's protagonists wrestle with moral complexity, confronting the darkness within themselves and emerging, if imperfectly, with awareness. Gabor Mate illustrates how addiction and destructive behavior are often symptoms of unrecognized shadow and trauma, problems that dissolve when consciousness and compassion are applied. Those who succeed in integrating shadow do not become perfect, they become whole. They inhabit the tension between light and dark with clarity, responsibility, and deliberate action. And here is the cinematic, haunting culmination. The monster will always exist. It is not something you can exile permanently, nor should you wish to. Its presence is a signal of life, energy, instinct, and awareness. The final act of mastery is not eradication, but recognition and alignment. You are the field in which good and monstrous tendencies compete, intermingle, and co-create reality. To live consciously is to navigate this terrain with courage, precision, and humility. Every choice becomes a statement of who you are and who you aspire to be. Imagine walking through the world with this understanding. Every interaction, every decision, every impulse is observed with the quiet knowledge of your dual nature. The world does not frighten you because you are no longer at the mercy of hidden forces. The moral terrain is no longer a trap, but a map. You see the shadows in others and yourself, and instead of fear or denial, you act from consciousness, integrity, and courage. The monster is no longer a threat. It is a companion, a teacher, a mirror that reflects both potential and responsibility. In the end, the ultimate truth is simple yet profound. Good people become monsters not because they are inherently flawed, but because they ignore their own complexity. But the same awareness that exposes this danger also contains the path to liberation. By confronting your shadow, integrating your impulses, and acting with deliberate consciousness, you transform potential monstrosity into conscious virtue. The paradox resolves. The monster is you, the hero is you, and the power to choose, the power to reclaim morality is also you. The question is no longer whether monsters exist outside yourself. The question is whether you will face the one that lives within, acknowledge it, and use its energy to become fully, consciously human. And that is the revelation that changes everything. The insight that leaves you haunted, empowered, and awake to the weight and the beauty of choice.